Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Marketing Cloud API series. In the previous video, you saw how we can create a custom REST API endpoint. In this video, we will see how we can secure it so that any incoming request is authenticated before we provide any data back to the requester. Now, if you recall our regular REST API process, we had an auth endpoint URL which we could actually use for getting an access token. And then we would use that access token in the header of the subsequent REST API requests, right? So in our case, we can also mimic the same. We can create a new code resource page which can be sent or which can be used for providing auth tokens. For this, we need to provide a set of client credentials to the requester. So we will know that the requester is someone who is authorized to ask for an auth token. Okay, and then we can also store the details like the expiration date, time of the token, and even the custom REST API endpoint which the user can use for subsequent custom REST API requests. Okay. Now this is the data extension that we can actually create and then store all the client credentials by the different applications that you're going to use for your custom REST API, right? So it has fields like the app name, the client ID, client secret. We will also store the auth token and the expiration date time each time it is generated over here, and then a status field. If you want to have multiple records for the same app with different client credentials, you want to have a history of it, you can keep it, and then always make sure you have only one of that as true. Which means only one of that is active, right? And then the REST URL, which probably would be the REST API custom REST API endpoint that you have. You will be actually having users use for the subsequent REST API request, not for the auth token. But once you have the auth token, where do you go? Like now in our previous video, you saw for the validate and the get coupon status, there was a REST API endpoint that you had provided, right? So that API endpoint, you can actually go ahead and store that over here, and it will vary from different code resource pages that you create, right? So in order to keep track of that, it is best to track that in your data extension here itself. Okay, so I have created one record inside this DE, and the app name is coupons management because we are actually dealing with the coupon scenario. Created a dummy client ID, client secret, which we will share with the Postman client in this case. But then in your case, you might be sharing that with an external system or external client who will actually be interfacing with your custom REST API, right? And then auth token, once it is generated, it will get stored here along with the expiration date and time. And like I said, the status, we will set it to true. And this is the URL, if you recall, from our previous video that we used for getting the validate and the get coupon status. Okay. Now let's look at our business scenario that we saw from our last video and see how we will be able to modify that to secure the endpoint. As you can see, we will now be creating this new code resource in a separate BU, say XYZ, which is a more secured one. It will probably be where only admins can access. Okay, so you don't want the regular people who are using the marketing cloud instance to go and see all the credentials that you have set up. So it can be a separate BU which only admins can have access to. And then we'll use the data extension that we saw earlier to generate the auth tokens for requesters who are actually pinging with the valid client credentials. Okay. Now the requesting clients can then send the REST API request to the endpoint, which we saw in our last video. But this time, the main difference will be that you will notice that in the incoming request, they will have to use that auth token that they received from the new auth token generation code resource page. Okay, for every request that is coming in, we will have to check for this auth token, and then if that is valid, we will provide a valid data response. If not, we'll have to provide an appropriate error message as well. Okay, so let me show you the Postman request for getting this auth token from the new code resource page which we are going to build. And you can see this code resource page, I published it already, and it is it will be this URL, which is actually different from the one that we used for the previous scenario, for the validate and for the get coupon status. So this one will be primarily used only for getting the auth token, right? And very similar to how we saw in the previous video, we will use the operation keyword here in the payload again because it's a post request, and we will use the request token as the operation, and then we'll provide three more parameters here. Okay, so one is the app name, which we saw in the data extension, because we want to know which client credentials you are referring to, right? It is for the coupons management, and then you have to provide the client ID and the client secret that specific for this particular app. So when the request comes in, when we parse through this payload, we know exactly this client is actually requesting for an auth token for the coupons management app, and these are the client credentials that we need to verify If it is valid, let's get a auth token for this client and provide that as in the response. Okay, so now back in VS Code, let's go ahead and start building out that code for that new code resource page that we've created for the auth token generation. Okay, so as you have seen previously, we will have the main block in main code in the try block. Okay, and then we will have functions created to go and execute each of the different functions that we need, right? So very similar to how we did the validate and the get coupon status code. We will first get the payload. Okay, we will use the get post data function, the payload that is coming in into this request, and then we will parse it and then pass that into our switch expression here to see, okay, what is the operation being requested, right? So we are actually only going to be using it for request token. Okay, so in which case we are going to call the function for get auth token. Okay, and if the operation is not equal to request token, any other operation that you specify, we want an error to be returned back saying it's an invalid operation that we are specifying. Okay, so pretty much straightforward. Okay, after this we will go ahead and then now write the function, the get auth token function. So let me put that here. Okay, so this is the shell of that function here. Okay, and then we are passing in the input payload. Okay, whatever we got in that payload, we are passing that into the get auth token from here. Okay, and then we have created a JSON out variable so that we can return the final JSON output that we need to send in the REST API response. Okay, so inside the function, the first thing that we need to check for is to see if the app name, the client ID, and the client secret that is being sent in the payload is blank. Okay, so if any of those are actually null, then we have a problem. We cannot go ahead and validate and then say, okay, this is a proper client who's actually authorized to ask for an access token, right? So if we don't get any of these as valid values, then we have to provide an error message back saying it's missing one or more parameters, right? So you have to specify app name, client ID, and client secret. Okay, and if they're valid, then we will go to the next step. Okay, so for the next step, we are actually going to be getting the data from that data extension that we saw earlier, right? The custom API auth one that we created. Okay, and this is using lookup rows. We will actually go ahead and then search for the app name, the status, and then if the app name equals the input app name that is coming in from the payload and the status equal to true, then return back any of those records. Okay, now one thing I probably forgot to mention is this particular data extension we are actually creating in a different BU, right? So even the code resource page also will actually reside in that same BU. Okay, in which case you can actually use the lookup rows over here. Okay, later on you will see when we are going to validate the auth token header coming in from the REST API request for our previous the custom REST API endpoints like validate request and the get coupon status. That code resource page actually resides in a different BU, right? From there, if you want to access this particular data extension, you cannot use lookup rows because it's in a different BU, right? And then we'll use WS proxy there. So, okay, we will see that shortly. Okay, so because the code resource page is residing in the same BU as the data extension that we created, which is the secure one, we can use the lookup rows function itself. We will go ahead and say, okay, show me all the records from that data extension that matches this app name with the status as true. And because of our working logic, we have said that ideally there should only be one row that is having that app name with status as true. Okay, now if we don't get any records returned, okay, that means we cannot find any client credentials for that particular app name that is valid, right? So we need to provide that particular error message back. Okay, and then we will set the JSON out variable like we have seen in the previous examples as well. We will set the status, which is what the error message will be. And if the scenario is valid, meaning let's say we have been able to generate the auth token, then we will have three more parameters that we will pass. One is the auth token itself, which we will generate, and the REST API URL, which I mentioned, if you want to do any subsequent calls to the REST API, custom REST API endpoint, right? So it will be the URL that we used in our previous video. Okay, so that one we have already stored it in the data extension, so we can pass that, and the expiration date of this particular auth token that you just generated. Okay, so that also we will process and we will add that here. Okay, and this JSON out is what we will actually return back into the main code to be sent back to the client requester. Okay, so once you have a valid row being returned, we will actually go ahead and retrieve the client ID and the client secret from that data record, from the data extension. Okay, and then we will check that with the input payload. Okay, so we have to compare that and see, like, okay, did the requesting client, whatever they sent in the payload, does the client ID match and the client secret also match with the values in the data extension for that app. Okay, if they don't match, then we have to provide a error message saying that, no, sorry, the provided client ID and client secret credentials do not match. Okay, and if it matches, great, then we can go ahead and start the logic for generating the auth token. Okay, so let me go ahead and put that code here. So we will, the REST URL, we don't have to make any changes. We can just get that from the data extension record itself. We'll populate that here. Okay, and then to create the expiration date, I'm just creating a temporary variable here for getting the current date and time. Okay, it'll be in now date here. The duration for this particular auth token, this you can vary. Normally for Marketing Cloud, it varies from 18 to 20 minutes. So I've just kept it as 20 minutes over here, and I'll show you shortly how to get that calculated. The auth token variable is where I'm actually going to store the generated auth token, right? So it's a random string of characters and letters and digits. So I've used the GUID function. 3 of them randomly will give me a long string, and then I'm replacing all the hyphens within that, so that I'll only have letters and digits in that. Okay, and then the expiration date, like you saw earlier, I'm getting the time of the current date string. Okay, and then from that I want to add additional how many milliseconds that I need to add for the duration, right? So if I take the current date and the time from that particular date, I'm going to multiply 20 into 60,000. That will give me the number of milliseconds for the minutes that I want for duration, right? So it will actually now, when I calculate this formula, I will get the expiration date as 20 minutes from now. Okay, so now we've got the auth token, we've got the expiration date also calculated, and the REST URL we have it from the data extension, right? So the final one is the response status. Right now there is no more error, so we will actually keep it as okay. Okay, so these 4 values will now then be populated in JSON out, and then we will be able to see that in the final response. Okay, so let's code is saved over here. So let's go back to our Postman request here, and let's go ahead and click send, and let's see if we get there. Yeah, so you can see we got the status as okay. We got this long string of which is our auth token. The REST URL, this is the URL that we used for our previous video. Okay, so we have stored it in the data extension. We can use that for subsequent API calls to our custom endpoint. And then this is the expiration date. Okay, so the expiration date that I have set 20 minutes from now. So this auth token will be valid for 20 minutes. After that, it will expire, and then it will show me the corresponding error message. Okay. Okay. So now that we have successfully created the custom auth token API request, we will need to go back and modify the old code resource base that we built in our last video to handle this new auth token. Okay, and when validated to prior to doing any other operation that we have kept, like the validate and the get coupon status, right? So the good thing is we don't have to modify any of the functions that we have written on the top. We don't have to change anything in validate coupon or the get coupon space status. It will be in the main block. We'll have to handle checking for that auth token header. Okay. Okay. So I made some space over here, to put in our first logic. I brought in the response variable on top because I want to check if there is any error messages that come in. We want to populate that in this variable and then return that at the end, right? So then first thing that we'll have to do is, using the get request header, we are going to check for this auth token in variable in the header. Okay, so when you are actually going to send it, you have to look for this particular value, when you're setting it in Postman or any of the clients that you're going to send the REST API request. Make sure you have this same value in the header of that request, right? In the normal REST API request, you would have seen it as authorization, right? So here we are going to use our custom header value. It's called auth token. Okay, and we will check for that particular value and then assign that to request header. Okay, so once you've got that particular value, you have to first check if it is actually blank, or null, right? So if there is no value in request header, then we have to respond back saying no, sorry, error, the auth token is missing in the header. Okay, so that's a problem. And then if you do have a valid value, we will go ahead and then process the next step. Okay, and that is primarily to go and verify the header. We need to pull in the data from that data extension, right, that we saw earlier, that is created in that secure view. Now keep in mind, this code is actually residing in the main view where where users have access to. Okay, and the data extension that we saw earlier and the code resource that is generating the auth token, that is in a different secure view, right? So this is the the external key for that data extension. So if I need to access that from this BU, I cannot use lookup rows, okay, which is why I'm using WS proxy, and you will see that I'm using the impersonation of that particular BU. Okay, that is the good part of using WS proxy. You can set impersonation, and you'll be able to go and get the data from that data extension. Okay, now I just need only the auth token and the expiration date time, because that is what I want to compare, right? And then I will provide a complex filter here, because I need two values to actually check. So if it was lookup rows, I would actually just say give me the data from this data extension where app name equals coupons management and status equal to true, right? We have seen that earlier in the auth token as well. Similar to that, we would have just used lookup rows function. In WS proxy, you have to specify the columns, okay, and the filter, and then using procs.retrieve, you can go ahead and specify the data extension object and the customer key that you have actually mentioned here, which is the external key. Okay, now take note that this is not data extension, it is data extension object, which means a row within a data extension. Okay, if you put it as data extension only, then it will actually go and refer to the actual data extension metadata structure, so it's outside. Okay, so you will not get the row within that data extension. Okay, so make sure you don't make that mistake. Okay, so after getting the retrieve function, we will actually have to go and get the actual the auth token and the expiration date from that data extension record that we're getting back, right? So for that, we will do a for loop. Okay, and this is slightly different from the way that you actually do lookup rows. So you will get a JSON back with having a results array in it, and inside that you will have the properties array, which will have the different fields. Okay, so since we are only expecting only one record back, I'm actually using the first record of the results array, and then within that, the number of fields it will actually cycle through, like the properties of you will get different fields for that record. So in our case, we are only getting two fields back, right? So I will just the loop will only execute twice, for I is equal to 0 and I equal to 1. The first one, it will go and check if it is auth token, then the name is auth, and it's going to be a key value pair, inside the properties. It will be a key value pair of name and value. Okay, so the name will be the name of the field, the value will be the actual value of that field. Okay, so we will first check the first element in that properties array, the name of that. If it is auth token, then the value of it definitely will be the auth token, right? So we will say assign that value to the auth token variable that we have declared. If it is not equating, which means it is automatically the expiration date time field, right? So that we will have it in this the second condition here in the ternary operator. So it will be expiration date equal to, we will convert that into a date format, and then we'll say get me the value of that. So by the time we come out from this for loop, you will have the auth token and the expiration date both automatically assigned from the values in the data extension row that we have retrieved. Okay, so after getting these two values, now we need to validate, right? So I will go ahead and get a temporary variable with the current date, and then first thing we are checking is if the date is the expiration date is already done, is it expired, right? So we will compare the current date with the expiration date. If it is greater, definitely then we immediately have to say, sorry, your auth token is already expired, please request for a new token, right? Otherwise, the second check you need to do is, okay, the auth token that you have received, we've also got an auth token in our request header, right? So whatever is being passed in the header, we will have to compare that over here. Okay, and if they don't match, again, it is an invalid auth token, right? So we need to provide a valid token. To ask them and send them an error and say send the proper token because it does not match. Okay, so finally, when we get here, this is where we are saying, okay, we have already checked all the conditions. So by the time you get to this particular else loop here, we are all good. The token has been validated. We can go ahead and proceed to the next step in our in our code here, which is to go ahead and process the actual request that is coming in, right? So the actual request that is coming in either could be a validate or a retrieve, right? Or if it's anything else, it will return back the error. So this we have seen earlier in our previous video, but now that we have added this extra wrapper on top of it, saying that first we need to check for the auth token. Only if it is like valid, then only execute the rest of the code. Okay. So I've cut that code from the bottom there, and then I've actually brought it into this else loop here. So I'll just indent that a bit for readability. Okay, so now you can see, like, it will only process this set of code to do the validate and the retrieve operation if it gets to this else loop where we have not received any error and we believe the auth token is a valid one. Okay, so and then we'll finally return the response here back to the calling requester. Okay, so now let's go ahead and test this out. So if you remember from our previous video, we have the validate coupon, right? So here we have the operation which is validate in the payload along with the email and the coupon code. So for this particular data, we saw that it was actually redeemed, right? It is one of the redeemed records. So we want to get that data back. Now the difference now that we have to do is we need to go ahead and specify the auth token. Remember, this is the variable that it will look for in the header. Okay, and I'm actually specifying the auth token here in the environment, which I'm actually setting it from the auth token request that we saw earlier, right? So whatever response we are getting back from that auth token request, I'm actually setting that using the tests in the over here. If I go to tests, I've written the code here to go ahead and set that into the environment variable. Okay, so the auth token and the expiration date, we are actually setting it there. So I can actually reference that over here. Like if I go here, I can see the latest auth token, right? And then if I go ahead and do a send now for this data here, I should be retrieving getting the response back successfully saying that coupon is redeemed. Okay, now in the body, if I don't specify an auth token, right? So now we have written the code, so we need to test it and see will it actually allow me to go ahead and still execute the code without a valid auth token. So you will see auth token is missing. Okay, so which means if I don't give an auth token in the header, it will not allow me to proceed like we were able to do in the previous video, right? So also if I do this, if I don't provide an auth token here, okay, but just having an auth token also, then also it will actually check and say, hey, you're missing the auth token, so you need to provide a value there. Okay, so if I go ahead and put that value back, auth token, let me just validate I'm getting the value. Yes. Okay, so if I put it back, I should be able to get the data back. Okay, now similarly for the get coupon status as well, we saw that we were only sending the operation as retrieve, and then in the query parameter we are giving allocated equal to true, redeemed equal to false. Okay, so we were able to get about, I think, 24 records or so, right? So here also in the header we have to provide the auth token. Okay, so now if I go ahead and execute, I should be able to see the 24 records here, right? If I don't give the auth token, okay, I should get the error. Okay, so it is now you have seen how you can easily be able to go ahead and then add this extra security in your custom API endpoint. Okay, and it will not allow you to execute any operation unless and until you have a valid auth token. Okay, again, which you cannot get unless you have a proper client credential which you are validating, and you are giving the auth token through this request here, right? So we have actually given the proper credentials, and they can request for a proper auth token, mimicking how the normal REST API functions work. Okay, so one thing to note is if you do happen to use custom REST API endpoints, please make sure you do ample testing to cover as many scenarios and error handling as well, because if anything goes wrong, then you're exposing your data into the public, right? And make sure you check all the different security options that, and make confirm that that you are not able to provide any data back unless and until there is a valid auth token being verified, right? And try not to expose a lot of data through these custom endpoints. Try to limit it to specific use cases, so that even if there's an unfortunate breach or something like that, the data is very limited. So if you're using it for temporary purposes and all that, use it and then you can probably go ahead and deactivate that so that it is no longer valid. Okay, so you can delete that code resource, and so that it doesn't use that particular page anymore, right? So nobody, even if somebody gets access to that URL, all the client credentials, nobody can use it in future, right? So if it's only for a temporary thing, use it, and then you can actually dispose of that. If you're using it for a longer term, make sure you do proper testing to ensure it is actually secure. Okay, Now I will also leave you with two of Greg's blogs, like one on how to SFMC and on gorturnington.com. So these two are very good resources to read upon, custom and API REST API endpoints and how to secure them. So Greg has given a great set of references and tips and tricks how you can use that. So definitely I would highly recommend that you go and read through this. I have been actually going through some of these, and I did get a lot of great tips from him, and then from some of the other SFMC gurus that we have in our community, right? So please do read through some of these great notes, and I hope you enjoyed this video and you got to learn something different and how you can actually create your own REST API endpoints and make them secure. Okay. Thank you for watching.